Khorne's elite units have always been some of the coolest in the game, in my opinion, and now quite a few of them have had their cost reduced, including, of course, Minotaurs with great weapons and Chaos Knights both. In this build here from Cool Umbrella today, facing off against Norsca, so the emphasis on elite heavy melee units definitely makes sense against a more melee-oriented faction like Norsca. Let's take a look at the build as we zoom way out there, get back to it. So, Skarbrand leading the way, he's got a Blood Shrine backing him up, 2 Minotaurs with 2 Marauders up front, a Knight supported by 2 Chaos Warhounds on each flank. So, very elite focused with these elite mobile units, but they should be able to support Skarbrand very well and just absolutely nuking specific locations. Khorne Minotaurs, of course, do have a little bit of extra armor. They also, I think, come with Frenzy baseline, which gives them extra charge and weapon strength. Just overall very strong. That Frenzy baseline also benefits these Knights of Khorne quite a bit. The Sword and Shield variant and the Lance variant both get pretty good benefit from it, but arguably the Sword and Shield is better with just a little bit more cost effectiveness and the fact that their stats are just overall very strong. I mean, they're in the 50s, almost 50 charge bonus as well on almost all their stats, which is just insane. Skarbrand just immediately chads straight through to the throwing axes. No, he's going to nope on over. The throwing axes actually will trade pretty well with the regular Warhounds. They've got 36 attack, 28 weapon strength. Decent enough offensive stats, they can fight back fairly well. One Minotaur here gets collapsed by Skinwolves, and Throg juiced up with that melee attack buff. They take quite a bit of damage there, but Skarbrand, Big Daddy, comes to town, and taking Throg against Khorne is a pretty extreme risk, given that all of their lords do fire damage, and almost all their elite units do fire damage as well, like these Knights of Khorne do. The Minotaurs do not, but even still, just that huge anti-large damage. Terror kicks in for Throg as well from Skarbrand, of course, and it's just an absolute disaster. Oh, did I mention this Frostworm is here as well for Norsca? They've got a scattering of Marauders and Champions. Yeah, the couple of Throwing Axe Hunters there, and the Skinwolves, plus a Werekin. The Werekin also weak to fire damage, but considering he's a little bit of a smaller target, he perhaps could slip by unnoticed. No, just kidding. Skarbrand's going to try and murder him here. Probably. We'll see. It depends on how kind of the threat works, but a nice breath attack there. The big benefit of the Frost Worm here is the double slow aura between Frostbite and the Chilling aura does mean that it can effectively cycle charge, even like these more mobile Khorne units like the Knights and Minotaurs. They're still in the 60s, 50s speed range. Skarbrand himself up into the 80s speed range, but as long as the dragon has good vigor, which currently it does, it should be able to escape those targets. It looks like Throg is getting chased off by some Warhounds, though the Cold Void are going to try and land there. Meanwhile, the Marauder Champs doing a decent job of just kind of tanking it out here. Some regular Marauders mixed in as well, and they'll be holding up for some time, but let's just get in close, soak up some of the cinematics we've been missing. It is not the most tactics here, it's just kind of a big chaotic blob. Mostly, got the Skinwolves running out there into the distance. I think ultimately having the Cold Voider bail out Skarbrand, Throg, while it makes sense to a degree, it's also going to cost in that the Cold Voider is not supporting this main engagement here. The Throwing Axes very briefly had drawn a bead on those Khorne Knights, but they're immediately just going to charge through the ranks. It's looking so cool, man, with their axes. Of course, these I call sword and board variants, but they're definitely axe and shield. And it even says so on their little unit banner here. Sometimes gets a little bit confusing with them versus the throwing axes with these guys, and I believe Nurgle has the same issue as well. But anyway, starting to get some Norscan units, a handful at least, routing and shattering. Looks like that Shaman Sorcerer might be back, but all of these Norscan regenerating units, the longer they're able to just kind of chase weakened stuff out on the peripheral, chase routing units, they're going to be regenerating that whole time, but a huge attack from Skarbrand onto the Skinwolf Werekin. Oh man, brave boy just standing and taking this fight, but with the Cold Voider nearby, maybe it's not so risky as it seems on paper. Marauders also supporting, but we get the Blood Shrine in here. The Blood Shrine, kind of an underrated unit to help kind of support damage output and also do a little bit of anti-infantry damage in and of itself. Very quickly that poor Skinwolf is going to get terrified and then launched into oblivion as the Cold Voider once again pulls back up into the air to safety. So Really, I think Norsca is starting to get a little bit behind at this point. One of the biggest reasons why is that Cold Voider just really hasn't been contributing for a lot of the battle. It's kind of been just flying around doing random stuff, not necessarily being in the right position. So let's see if it can perhaps start to pull this game back. These Minotaurs are charged up with Blood Greed now, so even if the Frenzy drops, they should maintain that immune to Psychology. Oh man, a couple of them getting downed by the throwing axes there, but Throg comes in, he's going to get an attack. Hounds of Khorne rush in, as do the Marauders of Norsca, but that elite anti-large damage from those Minotaurs is going to be enough. Throg pops Wintertooth Crown here, Fight or Die, and Foe Seeker just to try and hold himself in combat, but ultimately that's probably just going to spell his doom at the end of the day. A little bit of a Spirit Leech there on Scarbrand, just trying anything they can to take him down, but again, the Cold Voider out chasing some Warhounds when it really needed to be here in the center fighting. And, I mean, despite looking really rough on paper, the Norscan army didn't trade terribly outside of Throg and the Cold Voider. I mean, we'll have to see how much value Throg was able to actually get there, but, yeah, Skin Wolves and the Marauders there are now getting terrified away as well. Getting pretty close to army losses with Norsca, but Frostworm hasn't heard any bell yet. It's going to drop down for one more attack against the Chaos Knights here. Will they actually try and pull away is the question. Yeah, there's this Marauder Champs supporting as well. I didn't even realize it's actually Champs. Quite a bit of HP left, pretty decent stats. They're charged up with their physical resistance as well. Not going to matter at all against Scarbrand, but at least they'll be able to defeat these Knights, perhaps. Maybe. Knights do have pretty solid leadership, and it looks like they're trying to just maybe pull through on the surround. I'm not really sure. But reinforcements are inbound for Khorne, or Knights, and Scarbrand charging in the distance there. Looks like the Champs try to catch the charge of the Knights, but end up just getting absolutely clobbered, at least in mass, not so much in HP. Here comes the big boy. Honestly, with how things are right now, the Cold Voider is going to get mauled by Scarbrand's high weapon strength, even despite the fact that it has quite a bit more HP. At least it did momentarily, but you can see just a couple of attacks there forces it into army losses, and then that's game. So, yeah, interesting builds on both sides. I have to say, I quite like this Khorne build. Probably is not going to work so well against kind of the meta sort of wide skirmish, although, I don't know, the heavy armor of these Knights and the shields, plus the mobility here with Scarbrand kind of tanking some damage as well. You could maybe do something against like a wide mobility skirmish type Norsca build. Throg, just a huge liability in my opinion in this matchup. I would definitely always take Wulfric on the Mammoth, especially with his debuffs active. He can't actually trade with Scarbrand in the early game before Scarbrand has his weapon strength charged up too much. We'll look at that in just a minute here. I like the pick of the Cold Voider. I don't remember if this thing is weak to fire damage either. We'll have to check that, but at least on paper, it seems pretty solid. The Marauder Champ's also a pretty solid pick as well. Skin Wolves can do a good job against Fleshhounds-ish. I mean, Fleshhounds still trade okay against them, and it's just a little bit awkward due to, again, the weakness to fire. Maybe Famir would be a better option here, honestly, due to the armor piercing, magic damage, and whatnot. But it's hard to say. They obviously don't have their own regeneration and are much more expensive and slower, so definitely some things to think about in this matchup, but Blood Shrine ended up getting some pretty good value and also buffing up these extra elite units that much more, all of which paid for themselves except for the one Minotaur that kind of got crushed there at the beginning, including Scarbrand, which is awesome to see. Cost reduction on the Chaos Knights of Khorne in particular make them really appetizing, and these two units working in tandem especially, this is like an extremely scary mobility force. You've got your heavy kind of missile block anti-infantry, just massive charge power, and then your anti-large specialists to wreck anything big and scary that might come after these guys. So I really like that combination, actually, with Scarbrand, of course, as the anchor. Yeah, for Norsca, let's just talk a little bit about builds here. I don't do this too often anymore, but let's jump into it. I'm feeling it today, guys, so let's jump over to Norsca. So definitely Wulfric on the Mammoth is the way to go here. Considering that pretty much all Khorne Lords are going to be decent combatants, Hunter of Champions is super essential. Would cut Sword of Torgal, though it doesn't really give you much benefit on the Mammoth, as it only increases base weapon damage and not armor piercing, of course. But Wulfric, 14,000 HP is a huge amount to work with, so even if you slip up a little bit, I mean, he can definitely take damage very quickly, but especially if you try and, like, hunt Scarbrand early, with this. And then obviously, you know, the meta build would be to go with like, you know, some horse masters and horsemen and try and go wide and skirmish. Honestly, yeah, Beasts of Tashnar here. Ice Wolves after the buff, I need to check to see how they trade against Fleshhounds, but considering their cost, they might trade okay, actually. Might take a couple of them. I like Lore of Fire here. Spirit Leech is okay, but specifically against factions which can take, you know, a lot of physical resistance units like Scarbrand, Flaming Sword of Ruin, super essential. Cascading Firecloak is also just a really nice buff for Wulfric. It's super cheap and gives some extra melee defense and armor piercing damage. Maybe could take this guy on the Chariot if you're feeling frisky for some extra anti-infantry AP, but he is going to be a little bit vulnerable to that high DPS Khorne stuff. And then from here, I suppose you might need some infantry. I don't know, maybe you go with like a couple of Marauders. The champs seem to do okay, so maybe we take a couple of them and then just finish out with some cheap Marauders for some meat shields. Something like this probably be a little bit better against Khorne, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.